Thank you very much, Rabbi Myers and Mort Bar. We all go back a long way, but then all of us go back a long way. We all go back to Har Sinai. We were all there together thousands of years ago. So we're all friends, we're old friends. So in that capacity, speaking to all of you as old friends, and there are some people here who are long-term friends, old friends, Emmanuel Landau and Sue Dickstein I saw here, and the Fedders, and I don't know, some people that I just don't remember. I recognize Hillel, and it's good. It's very good to be here. Rabbi Tversky used to often joke, but I'm not so sure he was joking. I think he was very serious. And he said, yes, I wrote 60 books or 70 books, but they're all about one topic. They're all about self-esteem. I wrote about it in 60 or 70 different ways, but it's all about self-esteem. He gave, I've heard him speak and talk in many, many different formats, sometimes one-to-one, sometimes he's kind of schmoozing with a bunch of people, sometimes at conferences of Nefesh, which is an organization of Orthodox practitioners of mental health therapy, and sometimes in front of secular audiences, because he was a very prestigious psychiatrist with a specialty in addictions, and a very strong advocate of certain approaches to the healing and cure of addicts, especially addicts of alcohol. So I attended several conventions of the American Psychiatric Association and other such organizations at which he spoke. And he had a different definition of self-esteem for each of these contexts. It didn't always exactly explain it the same way. So I'd like to discuss the concept of self-esteem. I think I'm communicating his view fairly, but he expressed his view many times in different ways. Sometimes he would explain it through a Hasidic story, and sometimes through a technical psychiatric lingo. But I'd like to kind of share with you how I distilled, in my mind, what he thought of self-esteem. He felt that self-esteem was necessary. A person had to think well of himself or of herself in order to be able to really accomplish anything meaningful in life. It wasn't just a matter of, well, in order to be mentally healthy and not fly off the rails, you have to have a certain degree of self-confidence, of self-respect. It was much more than that. And he would talk about, very often, about the need for ambition. And I once gave a talk at a convention I guess he was there too, at the early conferences of Nefesh, where I kind of started off with a poem that I don't remember, but the two lines that rhymed were, you can't have ambition unless you have a sense of mission. All right? Mission means that you have a sense of purpose in life, that you're here for a reason, you're in this world for a reason. Obviously, in our religion, we think everyone has a certain tafkid, each of us has a certain purpose. God put us here for a certain reason, to accomplish something in our lives. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what he wants us to accomplish, and sometimes it's we go off on the wrong paths, attempting to do his mission, but we're wrong. And we find out sometimes catastrophically, but sometimes just plain through some type of insight that we get that, no, I really should be doing this and not that. And we change careers or whatever. So a sense of mission is crucial to self-esteem. Self-esteem means I know I'm here, I'm in this world, I have to do something, I'm here for a purpose, I'm a meaningful being, I'm not just one of billions of humans, I have a special mission here, let me try to figure it out and let me live this way. But it's a sense of pride, and it gives you a sense of courage and an ability to be resilient, to deal with frustrations of one kind or another, because I have a purpose, I have a mission. That's self-esteem. It's not just thinking, oh, I'm a great guy, oh boy, I can do it all. That's not That's not what he meant as self-esteem, and I don't think that that's what the field of psychology thinks of as self-esteem. We'll get into that. But it's in that sense, we distinguish self-esteem from narcissism. Narcissism means you think you're the greatest, the whole world centers about you, it's all about me, etc., etc. Who cares about the other guy? I look down upon the other person, etc. That's not self-esteem. That's narcissism, and that's a whole different diagnosis, a whole different type of person, a whole different set of existential issues. Now, if we look at self-esteem then as a sense of feelings of confidence, because I'm here for a purpose, we can begin to understand many things, ranging from the Parshios HaShavua that we're about to read in the next couple of weeks, and we began a little bit at the end of last week's Parsha. So I'd like to begin with that, with a little reflection about a Dvar Torah. I was hesitant to use this particular source to begin, because this source is from the Zohar HaKadosh, and normally I don't quote from the Zohar. I am not at that level yet. Maybe I'm old enough to qualify as far as age is concerned, but there are other requirements to be able to study Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, Zohar HaKadosh, the Holy Zohar, if you're not qualified. But I base myself on Rabbi Dr. Twersky, because he would occasionally quote from the Zohar. Usually he would say that Rav Levi Yitzchak quotes a Zohar, so I'll quote Rav Levi Yitzchak, and that's the way he would get into doing it. I'll just share with you a Zohar that's very, very strong. It begins actually with a column I wrote for Parshas Noach for this year, but I don't think I got it into the Torah Tidbits in time for the deadline. Because Torah Tidbits requires that the writers of the weekly Torah portion submit their column 3 weeks before the Parsha. All right, so Parshas Noach, I had to write Erev Yom Kippur. Erev Yom Kippur, the Mabul was very far from my mind. All right? And other things on my mind, Tshuva, Vidui, Noach and the Mabul wasn't speaking to me. So I wrote it a little later, and I probably missed the deadline, and they'll do a rerun. But somewhere that this one will be published. And in that context, I recall this Zohar HaKadosh, where I came across from some other source, I forget which, but I use it all the time. Noach, he gets a very bad rap, so to speak, from a lot of our Chazal. Was he a great man or not? Was he only a great man in his generation? Compared to all the other people who were pretty abominable group, compared to them, he was a tzaddik. Compared to him, he was a tzaddik tamim b'doro sof. And in general, he gets, all right, he's Noach, he didn't do what he could have done. He could have done so many other things, he didn't do it. And usually he's contrasted with Avraham Avinu, all right? That Noach walked, es ha'alakim his halech Noach. Noach walked along with God. He needed a support. He needed a sa'ad l'tomcha. He needed support. He couldn't do it on his own. He didn't have a strong sense of mission. He didn't have a strong sense of self-esteem. He needed Rebbeinu Shalom to help him along. As opposed to Avraham Avinu, of whom it is said, his halech lifonai v'heyei tomim. March ahead of me. Go on your own. You have your own self-esteem. And that was Avraham's way. So there's this comparison between Noach and Avraham, and Noach always comes out, not always, there are other opinions, but there are strong opinions that he was something lower level than Avraham. The Zohar HaKadosh is probably the most extreme in its statement of Noach was lower level, Avraham was a higher level, but the Zohar HaKadosh goes further and says Moshe Rabbeinu was still on a higher level even than Avraham. And if you look at it from the terminology that I've been using now, self-esteem, courage, self-confidence, mission, sense of mission, So you can see that the three, Noach, Avraham, Moshe, differ on this spectrum. Vayigash Avraham, Vayomer ha'af tispet tzadik im rosha. All right. Ribono Shalom comes along and tells Avraham Avinu, you know, I'm going to destroy Sodom v'Amorah. So what does Avraham do? He says, oh no, you're not going to do that. Now Avraham Avinu is in direct conversation with the master of the universe, with Ribono Shalom. Ribono Shalom tells him, I got some plans. All right, I'm going to destroy these cities. Evil cities, terrible, terrible, terrible. And Avraham's response immediately is to God, no. How can you do that? It's not, you know, you're the person who stands, you're the being who stands for justice. This is not right. You know how much self-esteem that takes? Right? How does Avraham have the chutzpah? He's talking directly to the Ribono Shalom. The Ribono Shalom doesn't ask him, should I do it? What do you think, Noach? He doesn't say that. He says, this is what I'm going to do. And these guys deserve to be destroyed, totally eradicated from the earth, and a whole world with them, with the animals and everything. And I'm sorry, not the whole world in this case, but just Sodom and Amorah. And Avraham stands up to that. I want to maintain that this is, Avraham had a sense of mission. Avraham's mission, as Ribono Shalom himself said, is ki yadativ l'man asher yitzaveh es bano v'es beiso achrov lasot tzedakah u'mishpat. That was Avraham's mission. That was his mission. Ribono Shalom says ki yadativ, which could mean, I know that he's going to carry on this tradition and preach tzedakah mishpat all over. Or as Rashi says, ki yadativ, I love him because I know he's going to do this. But it's all the sense of mission that Avraham had that allowed him to stand up to the Ribono Shalom. So the Zohar HaKadosh says as follows, Omer Rabbi Yehuda, Man choma abba derachmanusa ka'Avraham. All right? Who ever saw a father, this is a fascinating phrase in Aramaic, Abba Derachamanusa, the father figure of compassion. That's how the Zohar refers to Avraham. Who saw this? Only Avraham. Avraham is the model. Tochazi, come and see. B'Noach ksiv, compare Avraham to Noach. By Noach it says, Vayomer Elokim leNoach. God told Noach the same exact message, almost the same words, as he later told Avraham. Vayomer Elokim leNoach, this is in this week's parsha, Kates kol bosar bo lefonai. I'm wiping out the whole world. This is it. All right? And I'm telling you, I say lecha tevas atzei, go for it, make an ark, etc. Avraham, we saw what Avraham did when Ribono Shalom told him, I'm going to destroy Sodom v'Amorah. He stood up to Ribono Shalom, brazenly, so to speak, and said, no, you can't do that. It's not just. I stand, my mission, as you itself said it is, this is not Stoko Mishpat. What did Noach do? Nothing. As the Zohar says. Ishtik. He was quiet. He didn't protest. He didn't protest at all. V'lo amalei midi. He said nothing. V'lo boy rachmi. He didn't ask God for mercy. He should have shouted out, how can you do that? You're not even wiping out just Sodom and Amorah and a couple other little towns. You're wiping out the whole world and the animal world. But he didn't say anything. Aval Avraham, b'shaita di'omalei kutcha berichu, zaka Sodom v'Amorah kiroba. When Ribono Shalom said to Avraham that this is intolerable, this Sodom v'Amorah, erda noviyera, etc. Miyad ksiv vayigash Avraham vayomer. What? Ha'af tispet tzadik in Rosha. You're going to wipe out tzadik in Rosha? That's not justice. How can you do that? So that's Avraham and Noach. Noach didn't have the sense of mission. He didn't have the self-esteem to be able to stand up and protest God himself. And Avraham did. That much people are aware of. The average person knows Avraham and as contrasted to Noach. And that's to the advantage of Avraham. But the Zohar goes further and says, you think Avraham, he was the best self-esteem guy out there? No. Avraham was minor leagues compared to Moshe Rabbeinu. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Af Avraham loy ovad shelimu kedekayos. Even Avraham didn't do enough. As strong as Avraham's response was to resist the Ribono Shel Olam's decree, it wasn't good enough. Noach lo ovid midi. Noach did nothing. Lo hai v'lo hai. Not for this and not for that, which the commentaries in the Zohar say it means Noach didn't stand up for the righteous and didn't stand up for the wicked. Avram stood up for the righteous, but not for the wicked, right? Avram said, if there are 10 tzaddikim, if there are 20 tzaddikim, but he was basing his protest on those people who were righteous. So Noach lo ovad midi lo hai v'lo hai. Avraham tov adina kedekayos. Avram Avinu was partially there. He did it fairly well because he says, "V'lo yamus zako im chayova." I don't want those who have zechusim to perish along with those who deserve to be punished. But v'shari mechamishim ad asora, he went from 50 tzaddikim to 10 tzaddikim. V'lo ashlim d'lo boy rachmi ben kach uben kach. He should have asked God to spare all of Sodom, even the wicked in Sodom. Noach didn't protest for anyone, didn't want to stand up for anyone. Avram stood up for the righteous, but not for the wicked. The Yom Avram, lo be'inu lemispar argar avdoi. Avoman ovid shleimo kedekiyos. Who did the right thing? Dom Moshe. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. The kivon, the Yom HaKadosh Baruch Hu, soru maher min haderech. Osu lahem egel mastecha vayishtachvu lo. God told Avram, these Jews, they worship a golden calf. They're really off the road, off the rails. So what does Moshe do? He certainly is not quiet. And he certainly doesn't say, well, there may be 50 Jews who didn't worship the Egel. He doesn't say that. But rather, Vayechal Moshe es pnei Hashem Elokov. And he says, Ribono Shel Olam, im tisach atosam. If you forgive them, fine. If not, I'm out of here. V'chen yinam misifrecha asher kosofta. So Moshe went beyond Avraham. Because Moshe's, quote, self-esteem, sense of mission and purpose was stronger than Avram's, and Avram's was certainly stronger than Noach. And this has to do with how they defined themselves, or how they were defined by the Ribono Shel Olam or by their mission. What was Noach's mission in Noach's mind? We don't know. I read the parsha, what's coming up this week. You know, what were the motivations of Noach? We don't know much about him. Noach motzah chen b'nei Hashem. God liked him. All right, that's all we know about him. And he was a tzaddik tamim. What did he do? What did he stand for? What was his goal in life? What was his objectives? What were his ambitions? We don't know. But if you follow the story long enough in this week's parsha, when the whole thing is over, what does he do? He plants a vineyard and he gets drunk. That's what he does. You know, normally you would think a person has an opportunity. He has an olam. His world was destroyed. So what do? All right. We, a generation before us, dealt with a world that was destroyed in the Holocaust. So what was the reaction of a Jewish leadership? Hasidim, Misnagdim, whatever, they built yeshivas, they stood up for something, they had a mission. What was lost was lost. It was a mabul, worse than a mabul, but they did everything. Their sense of mission was self-esteem. You got to build a Ponevezh, and you got to build a Lakewood, and you have to rebuild Hasidus, and you have to rebuild Ger and Satmar, and that was their sense of mission. And the individuals who were behind this had self-esteem. Go down the whole list of Gedolim of that generation, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Aaron Kotler. They had self-esteem. That doesn't mean they went around bragging about how wonderful they were. Quite the contrary. They were humble people, but they had self-esteem because they had a sense of mission, and they wouldn't let any obstacle stand in their way, whether it was a financial obstacle or ideological obstacles or opponents or naysayers or whatever. They did what they had to do. They did what their mission was. Avraham Avinu, what was his mission? La'asel tzedakah u'mishpat. That's his self. That mission was defined for him. His self-esteem was based upon, I'm in this world to get justice done. And this is not just, and therefore I can even stand up to God himself and protest. What was Moshe's mission? Moshe's mission was to lead the Jewish people into Eretz Yisrael. That was his mission, right? That was his mission, to get the Torah, step one, and then to go to Eretz Yisrael. He was frustrated personally because he never got into Eretz Yisrael, and he begged God how many hundreds of times, please let me in, because that was his mission. And that driving mission to get the Jews into Eretz Yisrael, Jews meaning every single one of those who left Egypt was going to come into Eretz Yisrael, and that's my mission in life. And therefore, even if they worship the golden calf, Ribbon Shalom, Imtisa Chatosam, fine. If not, Mecheni Nami Sifrecha. I'm out of here. I'm out of here. Wipe me out of your book. That's not what I'm here for. Literally, take me out of the book. My life's mission is very clear. I have to bring every one of these Jews, even those who are dancing around the Egel, around the golden calf. I got to bring them to Eretz Yisrael. That's my job. Anything else, I'm off. I'm not here. Well, that's a kind of what we face. The Jewish people have faced this throughout Jewish history. And if you think about it, you may know such people even individually in your own experience. There's a phrase that the Baal HaTanya, the Alter Rebbe, uses in his introduction to the Sefer HaTanya. It's a fascinating phrase. To my knowledge, it's his original phrase. But the Alter Rebbe, going back now to late 1700s, became very, very popular. And he was spreading his teachings to hundreds and hundreds of people. And he couldn't handle it all. And this is what he writes. People wanted to come to him for yechidus, for private sessions of counseling, spiritual counseling, and he couldn't handle it all. So he began to write what eventually became the Sefer HaTanya. And so he said, but people are going to say, I have the Sefer HaTanya, but I still have questions. I want to go see the Rebbe. And the Rebbe is too busy. He just can't do it physically. It's a superhuman. So what did he do? He said, in every town, there are people who are knowledgeable. They may not be exactly 100%. They may not be on his madrega. But there are people who, if you have a problem, come with the Sefer HaTanya, which then was just the letters, scattered letters that he wrote. Take these letters and go to this local shliach, so to speak. I don't think he used the word shliach yet, for this purpose. And he'll talk to you. And these people, I want to address them. These people that I'm assigning to do this job, let them not be manipulated by their own shiflus shel sheker. That's his concept, that's his phrase. Shiflus shel sheker. It's holding yourself low, false humility, I would translate it as. False humility. If you have a mission in life and you have the skills to reach that mission, you've got to do that. And if you don't do that, you're guilty of shiflus. You might think you're being the big humble person. Moshe Rabbeinu was Onav Mikol Adam. It's almost a paradox. The Onav Mikol Adam can stand up to God and say, I'm against what you're trying to do, and I'm going to risk my life and make sure that I defy you and I get these people to Eretz Yisrael alive. He's an Onav. He's humble. But had he not done that, it would be a shiflus shel sheker. If he would say, who am I? No, I said, who am I? I can't speak to God. I'm a humble person. I can't stand up to God. If God says he's going to destroy the world, he'll still destroy the world. Give me a boat, I'll be able to get out of it. That's all. That's his whole heroism. No sense of mission, no spine to stand up to Ribbon Shalom. Avram had it, but in a certain way. Tzakol Mishpat. Moshe's drive was consuming. And the opposite of that is a shiflus shel sheker. I often speak to people who are in leadership positions or potentially in leadership positions. You got to take the ball and run with it. You have a mission in life. Fortunately, you were raised, you had a good education, Rabbi Shalom gave you an intellect, he gave you certain leadership skills. You got to use them. You got to use them. And don't say, who am I, shiflus shel sheker. It's one of the many times I've known people individually, great Talmidei Chachamim, but they're so modest, no one ever got anything from them. I'm too modest to write a sefer. I know such individuals personally. Maybe you knew that too. I'm too modest to get in front of a crowd and speak. It's not for me. I'm too shy. I'm too modest. Who am I? Obviously, there's a value to that, But there's also the opposite value, the other side of the coin, is shiftless sheker. It's a false humility, the lack of asserting who you are, who your potential is, what your mission is. I'm not here to give a hesped for Rabbi Dr. Twersky, but he was a model of such a person. The Ribono Shel Olam gave him certain talents, all right? God-given talents. Fine, Baruch Hashem. He recognized them and he used them courageously. He didn't fall into the trap of shiftless shel sheker. That wasn't what his father taught him. That wasn't what his family tradition is. If you have it, Ribono Shel Olam gave you a mission. Obviously, sometimes you're not sure what the mission is, but the mission is to use your kochos, to use your God-given resources, your talents, your intellect, your singing voice, whatever it is, you know. This is just a kind of a digression, not a digression, but an introduction to the whole theme of self-esteem. What I want to do as part 2 of this talk, related to part 1, is to go to a totally different source. Lahavdil ben Kodesh l'chol. Here we had Kodesh, we had, this is a Zohar Kodesh, which I had rebound. It's a 3-volume Zohar. It's divided differently with the notes of some person. I don't know who this was. Notes on the Zohar he wrote in the margins. I never was able to identify the person, but it's the Vilna edition of the Zohar in Parmem Beis, which is 1882. But now I'm going Lahadel Ben Kodesh L'chol to much more recent publication in the Zohar, and it is the American Psychologist. It's a psychological journal from this past January, was it February, 2022. January 2022, American Psychologist. There's a whole section devoted to the question of self-esteem. And the major article is written by 2 psychologists, one from the University of Bern, which is Switzerland, the other from the University of California, which, as far as I still know, is still part of the United States of America. You never know these days. There are all kinds of states are threatening secession. But seriously, Ulrich Orth and Richard W. Robbins. And they title their major article, "Is High Self-Esteem Beneficial?" Is self-esteem a good thing? Is it beneficial? Does it bring benefits to people? Or you just have a gaiva? Revisiting a classic question. So they say as follows, and I think it's a very fair survey, and they come to a conclusion, but it's controversial. Believe it or not, there's a great controversy which has been going on in these journals for the past 10 or 15 years, actually 20 years, is self-esteem from the psychological perspective. Is it beneficial? Does it change your behavior for the good? Or is it not good? Possibly just the opposite. So they write, on the one hand, researchers have long argued that high self-esteem helps individuals to make friends. If you think well of yourself, you can make friends. That's a good thing. To have more satisfying romantic relationships. It's a good thing. If you only have the proper romantic relationships. To be more successful at school and work. That's certainly a good thing. And to experience higher psychological well-being. And he gives a list, Gansa Megillah, of references, research done by all sorts of entities, universities, etc., that it's a good thing. In the 1990s, a task force of the California Department of Education even suggested that self-esteem is a panacea, cure, for a wide range of societal problems, including crime, violence, substance abuse, teen pregnancy, child abuse, chronic welfare dependency, and educational failure. In fact, I personally, I'm sure you too, to some extent, almost obsessed with the mass shootings that one sees, especially in the United States in the past several years, especially school shootings. People come on school grounds. In one case in Connecticut, it was at kindergarten. They shoot for no reason. Several or many children, little children, adults, etc., etc. You see this every few weeks. during recent years this comes up. When you see profiles of the so-called mass shooters, and you read about their background without being a gross psychologist, you just read the newspapers, you see that what's the tzad hatzova shebahem, what the common denominator of these mass shooters is, these, generally they're males, and usually youngsters, teenagers, sometimes young 20s, they had very low self-esteem. They had no friends. They were loners. They had no self-esteem. They didn't do well in school. They didn't think much of themselves. In fact, the one who's on trial for the Parkland, Florida murders, he killed 20 or more people, so he wants to be killed. He wants the death sentence, personally. That's how low his self-esteem is, and it always was.
How do you build it?
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. We'll get to that, hopefully. Okay, but that's a very good question. It's a very good question. But the argument here is that the self-esteem is necessary. If you have low self-esteem, who knows where you can end up, and you might end up with that whole Megillah of teen pregnancy and substance abuse and violence, and I'll just add mass shooters to the list.
Yeah,
but that's
Israel's different. You have the Arabs that they have
and
they start killing everybody.
One thing at a time. One thing at a time. On the other hand, this is high self-esteem. On the other hand, there has been widespread skepticism about the supposed benefits of self-esteem. In 2003, and this is the tzad keneged, all right, this is the other side, the sitra achra of self-esteem. Whereas the Rabbi Dr. Twersky and the research I quoted until now was self-esteem is terrific. There's a widespread skepticism. An influential review in 2003 by a man named Roy Baumeister was the head of the team. And he, even though it's already 20 years ago almost, he has a response to this article. He wrote back in 23, their conclusion was, with the exception of the link to happiness. In other words, he's going to grant you, self-esteem is good for one thing. If you have good self-esteem, you're going to be happy. But does that mean you're going to do well in school? Does that mean that you can become a leader in your community? Does that mean that you're going to become a neurosurgeon? Not necessarily, they said. Not at all. The only link is to happiness. Besides happiness, the research links, the effects are weak to modest. Self-esteem is not a major predictor, they argued back in 2003. And it's not a major predictor or a cause of almost anything, with the possible exception of happiness. So the authors of this article write that article back in 2003 took over the media. All right? The media in general is not so hot about high self-esteem. All right? They don't see that as a virtue. And he gives some examples. Publication of the article back in 2003 led to an avalanche of articles in the media with titles such as Self-Esteem, Why We Need Less of It, Time Magazine. Exploding the Self-Esteem Myth, Scientific American. The Trouble with Self-Esteem, New York Times. And Deflating Self-Esteem's Role in Societal Life, in Societal Ills, New York Times. Right, so that's the machlokas that we have here. You know, these authors writing today, this year, find self-esteem to be a very important value, high self-esteem. And the others, Baumeister and Company in 2003, they argue against this. They argue against it. Now, these authors, of course, are fully aware of what this other group wrote in 2003. And his main taina, so to speak, is, I agree. If you have high self-esteem, you're going to be happy. Okay, you're going to be happy. And happiness is wonderful. But in terms of concrete, objective results, you don't see any difference. So they go about to disprove that. And they show, and I have no time here to do it, you can look this up online, they go through various things. School, doing better in school. They have absolute proof, hundreds and hundreds of research articles. However you measure self-esteem and however you measure achievement in school, Yes, high self-esteem correlates very highly with success in school. All kinds of school, kindergarten, postdoctoral training, etc. Work. All right, they go through various types of work, office settings, factory settings, etc. Definitely a correlation. High self-esteem, more success. Mental health, physical health, antisocial behavior. It's a big category. And they write that there's a sentence here that kind of says it all. In summary, there is a robust meta-analytic, this is fancy psychology language, evidence that low self-esteem is concurrently associated with antisocial behavior, and longitudinal studies, long-term studies over decades and decades. In other words, 30 years ago, this young man or young woman had high self-esteem. 30 years later, they find that low self-esteem is associated with antisocial behavior, etc. But they have a sentence there that I can't quite find, and that is when you parcel out narcissism. Here's the sentence. However, when they analyze Baumeister's results, Baumeister finds that high self-esteem is not good, right? Low self-esteem is better. So they write as follows. However, when self-esteem is appropriately distinguished from narcissism, there's your question about gaiva. Narcissism is in plain old Yiddish Hebrew gaiva, arrogance, thinking that you are the center of the world, no one else matters. So you have to appropriately, this is their language, distinguish between self-esteem and narcissism. Then the theoretical argument for high self-esteem causing antisocial behavior becomes untenable. In other words, there's a very fine line, and that's why I was trying to be careful, and Dr. Twersky was always careful to distinguish between self-esteem in the sense of whether you lose a sense of mission, a sense of purpose, a sense of doing something for the benefit of others. That's part of high self-esteem. Narcissism almost sounds like the same thing, but narcissism is different because it's self-centered. You're not interested in any way in other people. You're interested only in yourself. I don't like to get political here, but there are elections coming up in Israel and in the United States in the next week or 2 or 3. And just think about examples in the political world of people who are total narcissists, who have zero cognition of other people and other causes, et cetera, except for themselves. You figure out who I'm referring to. I don't dare. I'm only, in Israel for a few more weeks. I'm only a guest. But we're still working on Aliyah, which is itself sometimes a blow to self-esteem. we need in order to apply, you need a statement that you're proof of Jewish identity. So I said to the people in charge of the process, well, fine, I'm not personal friends, but I'm familiar and close with the chief rabbi, so he'll write my letter that I'm a Jew. No, because he doesn't know me. He didn't know my mother. How can he say my mother was Jewish? You need your local rabbi back home and wherever it is. The local rabbis back home didn't know my mother. Right? My mother died long before some of them were born. And I had to ask a young rabbi in my community, one of my successors after Rabbi Gottlieb was Rabbi Marwick. And so he wrote me a letter dated, let's say, February 1st, 2022. Rabbi Weinreb is halakhically Jewish. His mother is Jewish. Fine. And same thing for Mrs. Weinreb. Then, let's say February 1st, around then. July 1st, I get a notice from Nefesh B'Nefesh. We hate to tell you this, but your Jewish identity has expired. Now, I am not joking. Right. I'm telling you the story because I figured instead of talking all this heavy psychology and everything, I get a good laugh. But this is true. My response when the person told me this, I started laughing too. I figured, he's kidding around with me. He knows I'm going through apostilles, ishmapostilles, and all kinds of different papers. So I figured he figured he'll kid me, but no, he's not kidding. So I went back to Rabbi Marwick, and he said, "Perfect. I never have to do this. I don't have to rewrite the letter. I just have to change the date." I updated, you know, Mikan Aliyah Shloshim. He said back to his Jewish identity. Now I know some people who would love to have their Jewish identity revoked. You know, lots of people like that, but I'm not one of them. Baruch Hashem.
But I just want to tell you something.
Shlo us on your goy.
When we made Aliyah in '71, and they asked my husband, and I don't know if anybody knew him, they
I knew
didn't
it.
know if he's Jewish. He started to unbuckle his belt. She said, "Okay, okay." Oh, he was.
That fits with the David Shrei that I knew, okay. I knew him a long, long time ago. Okay. So that's the issue. I just want to touch one point before moving on to how can we effect or produce self-esteem in others, especially in our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. I'm not going to go more into the distinction between self-esteem and narcissism, but they argue that that distinction must be clear before you start talking about high self-esteem. You can't think that high self-esteem means gaiva. The high self-esteem means pride and arrogance and any of these things. That's not what high self-esteem is all about. But let me move ahead to the question. It's a very important question. There are articles in the journal about this too, but I'm going to lean upon other sources for now, secular and holy and sacred. How can one raise children with self-esteem? So, long ago, which means when I was in graduate school, it was a very long time ago, I was reading a book, probably part of a course that I was taking. Then it was an excellent book. One of the things I found in general, whether it's Jewish literature or lahavdil, secular literature, or any field, the current bestsellers are not necessarily the place to learn about that particular thing. You know, if you're going to learn, let's just take a Jewish side, you're going to learn halacha from the most recent sefer, Shemitah, all right? You learn the laws of Shvius from a recent published sefer from someone current who could be a great Talmud Chacham. I'm not knocking his sefer. But if you really want to learn Hilchos Shvius, you got to go back and learn Mishnah Shvius, and the Rambam, and Rishonim, etc. You have to go to the older sources. We have a tendency in our modern world that whatever is new and updated, that's the last word. And whatever is 100 years old, that's old fish. And nowadays, if it's 5 years old, it's already outdated. You got to be up to date. I don't believe in that. I find in the field of psychology, some of the old classics that were written 100 years ago have more to say than some of the things that we see written nowadays as being so authoritative. But anyway, this is the book. Title of the book is Antecedents of Self-Esteem. What comes before self-esteem? Right? Child comes out of his mother's womb or her mother's womb. You know, when do you get started on self-esteem? What can you do as a parent or a teacher to foster self-esteem in your child or an adult? You know, what's the antecedents? What's the ingredients that go into self-esteem? And the authors are Group, Cooper Smith, and others. And I just love this book. I don't know what happened to my copy but I go back to these ideas often in many ways, especially since I found that there was someone in our world, not in the psychology world, but in the world of Torah, great Torah leadership, who was an exemplar of high self-esteem in our sense, of a sense of mission and purpose and courage and standing up to whatever he believed was right, much more recently than Noah or Avram or Moshe, and I'm talking about Rav Shem Tzvi Hersh. All right? So he is, in my mind, you look through all the great people of relatively recent Jewish history, 19th century in this case, he is, and his life was the epitome of this type of self-esteem. He came from a different country. He was born in what today is Hungary, and he became a Rav in, of all places, Frankfurt, Germany, in the middle 1800s, which then was the center of enlightenment and reform and modernization in the high German culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he came to the city of Frankfurt, and he stood on his ground. Some agree, some disagree to this day. We can't keep going this way. We can't continue with these people. We have to start our own Austritt Gemeinde. We have to have our own group because we have to do things right. He started his own school system. He wrote voluminously. How many volumes? The collected works are something like 20 volumes translated into English. And people keep discovering more and more, et cetera, et cetera. So when I was going for my doctorate, it tells you how long ago I went for my doctorate, I had to have a reading knowledge of 2 languages. And Hebrew was not one of them, and then obviously Yiddish was not either. So I had to learn French and German. When I learned German, one of the things I was glad to do when I studied German language is that now I could read not only Freud in the original, but Tzvi Hersh in the original. And it's a big difference. The translations vary in quality. That's a known fact. There are better translations, lesser translations, whatever. But there's a Hebrew translation, several Hebrew translations of his works into Hebrew from German. And one of them is entitled, it's to be found in a set of Sforim by a publishing house called Netzach. I don't know if it still exists, this publishing house. It was in Bnei Brak, this is about 20, 30 years they published these works called Yesodos HaChinuch, Foundations of Education, by the collection of essays by Rav Hirsch. So one essay is entitled in Hebrew, Shituf Pu'ula Bein HaHorim Uveit HaSefer. The joint venture, Shituf Pu'ula, of parents and the school. This is an ongoing issue for especially in religious circles. What's the role of the parent? What's the role of the school? Et cetera, et cetera. He has a very, very firm answer, which is part of his sense of mission, and standing up against the tide, against the river, upstream. He felt that the school's job is to teach what in English we would call the 3 R's. What in Hebrew we call Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos, all right? Chumash and Rashi. That's the job, all right? Midos Tovos is not the school's job. Midos Tovos, character traits, good behavior, courtesy, etc., that's the parent's job. And parents shouldn't mix in with the school because the school should not send homework out. The school is for Gemara and Rashi, for Chumash and Rashi, for whatever it is. You come home, that's where you work on Midos. And he writes, I don't have the quotation in front of me, but he writes, because only in the nest, he uses the German word for nest, only in the nest of the family is it possible to teach right and wrong. Is it possible to teach honesty? Is it possible to teach there's a German word for it in Hebrew, it's translated as vatranut, the vater, to another person. You can only do that in the family. You can't do that in the classroom. That's what he argues. You can't teach it. You can't get on the blackboard and say, you must tell the truth. You have to do it when the kid is 5 years old and takes cookies from the cookie jar, and the mother said, don't take the cookies. And he says, that wasn't me. And you find out that he's lying, so you have to correct that behavior, and that's how he's going to learn to tell the truth. It's not going to happen in the classroom. But this is the theme of this particular sheet of Pu'ula. So he gives a list for parents of all the things that you have to teach at home, and you can't do it in a school setting. And like I mentioned a few of them now, the vater, to have brotherly love or sisterly love, take care of the younger children, have a sense of communal responsibility, study on your own, read, all right? A lot of these things are on his list. But one thing is on the list is what he calls learning how to achieve what Chazal call simcha shel mitzvah. Is the term in Chazal, you find it several places in Shas, that there's such a thing as the joy of the mitzvah. We have popular books out there, the joy of cooking and the joy of this, the joy of that, the joy of the mitzvah. So how do you define that simcha shel mitzvah? What is that? So he says it's as follows. If a person has a clear goal, all right? Just had sukkahs, I have a clear goal. I want to fulfill the mitzvah. I'm doing a simple one. It could be a little expensive sometimes. Arba minim, all right? I want to do the mitzvah of Arba minim. I want to have a kosher, not a kosher only, but a mahuda dika, very fine, esrig and lulav and aravis and hadassim. That's my mitzvah. Fine, very well-defined mitzvah. All right, so I have a goal. I want to buy the mitzvah. I also am aware of how to get Arba Minim. When I was in Baltimore, so I would call up the local Esra guy and tell him, this is Rabbi Weinreb, I want Mahadrim, Minam Mahadrim, whatever it costs, fine. And that's what I had to do. Here, I don't know where to start. Right? Where you go to the street. Anyway, I found, someone told me that Hatzalah was having like a fundraiser where they would get the Arba Minim for you. They would choose it. The esrog would be closed because of Shemitah, so you had it from Notes of Bezdin, a whole story, and they deliver it to your home. All right, that takes away some of the of the work you want to put into doing a mitzvah. But still, for me, that was the best thing to do. Pay an extra 10 shekel for delivery, fine. And then I got and we were in the middle of unpacking and this and that and the other thing. Guy knocks on the door 2 days before Sukkot. Knocks on the door, I open the door, oh, beautiful, everything's fine and dandy. So that's a simcha shel mitzvah, because I knew what I wanted, I knew how to get it, and I got it. And once I got it, I didn't need 3 M&Ms, and I didn't need a congratulations, mazel tov yeshkoyach. I felt internally joy. I actually felt joy. Someone sent me a YouTube, maybe some of you Baltimoreans know Menachem Kovacs. Menachem Kovacs' wife just passed away, by the way. It's a Sarah Liba, Sarah Leah. So anyway, she passed away just recently, I'm sorry to say. He's still shooting Shiva. But before that, obviously, a week or two ago, he sent a YouTube around with this Hasidic person, I guess some type of a Chabad person, and he's walking around the Kaisel, on obviously Chol Hamoed Sukkos, and people are standing there with the Arba Minim. They're standing with the Arba Minim, so they become fadvekist, you know. They're standing with the Arba Minim. They're very serious. So he goes over. This person goes from person to person. He's going to Hasidim, to Misnagdim, kippot frugot, black kippot, green kippot, children, adults, all kinds of people. And they're all with the same kind of sincerity and sour faces. So he says to one of them, willst du mekayem deiner mitzvah daraisa? So the person says, sure, I want to fulfill a mitzvah daraisa. So he says, steht in Pasuk, usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. All right, you're supposed to take the Arba Minim and be happy. Without exception, immediately they burst into a big smile. Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, shekidshanu mitzvah yisrael v'tzivanu. And have a whole Rakida. That's the way you're supposed to do it. That's a simcha shel mitzvah. But it's the simcha shel mitzvah comes because you know what you want. You have a goal, you have a purpose, you have a mission, you have a sense that you can accomplish it. You know, if you can't accomplish it, so you ask help. In this case, you ask Hatzalah to please help you out. I'm very busy now. You can deliver it, but you do it. If you take your kid, could be 3 years old. I've done it with 3-year-olds, and with mixed success, but some success, and with all kinds of other people, even aged people. There's some aged people in this audience, and including myself. And it works, all right? You tell the kid or the child or the person, look, define what you want to do, all right? Clean up your room, all right? It's a long way from Arba Minim, but it's also a mitzvah, right? And the kid has to understand. If mommy says, clean up your room, and it's not just being a mean mommy who's giving you a terrible chore. It's a mitzvah. This is a mitzvah of kibbud aim. This is what it's all about. And you get a tremendous reward for listening to mommy. And you explain to the kid this, and you say, hey, clean up the room. And you explain what you want, all right? I want these, what do you call them? Legos. I want these Legos to be put into that box. And I want these dolls to be put into that chest. And that's what we want, all right? And you know, you have the whole day to do it. You can do it now, you can do it later, but by 4 o'clock I want the room to be clean. So you give the child a mission, defining the mission, telling him, explaining what's involved in the mission, and tell him, if you need any help, have any questions, tell him or her, you have any questions, come to mommy and we'll see if I'll help you. And then when the kid comes down and says, mommy, the room is clean, you go up and say, it's clean, perfect. Then you reward the kid with simcha shel mitzvah, right? You did a mitzvah, simcha shel mitzvah. if you give them whatever treat it is, a donut, whatever you like to give them, a reward of some sort, noch besser. But that's the simcha shel mitzvah. The child has a sense of high self-esteem. That's the beginning. It's just a nucleus. But this becomes a pattern of child raising, and it becomes a pattern of the way you live your life. You define your goals. You have an objective. You define them. You learn how to achieve the goals, which might take 4 years of medical education or whatever it is. Or it may take just 5 minutes of simple instructions. But you make sure the child or the person knows how to get there. And when they get there, you reward them. And the fact is, you don't have to reward them because the sense of achievement is there. I did something. It was difficult. It's recognized by others. Said, "Yeshkayach, good job, great job." Pat him on the shoulder, whatever. Kiss him on the forehead, whatever it is. I just want to conclude. One of the phrases that I once heard Rabbi Dr. Tversky use in a more, what's I say, yeshivish setting, all I remember is these, 4 or 5 words. Let me tell you, he said, quote, ambition is not a dirty word. Ambition is not a dirty word. Ambition is the framework for how you build self-esteem. I have a goal. The goal could be whatever, to get a PhD, it could be to clean your room, it could be to buy a whatever it is. I have an ambition, large or small. That's good. That's what builds character. That's what builds high self-esteem in the constructive sense. I just want to conclude by saying that Rabbi Dr. Tversky is an example of this, of self-esteem, which he had. Not narcissism, but self-esteem. And he knew what a simcha shel mitzvah meant. I saw him many times celebrating various mitzvahs, from mitzvah kala to mitzvah chamura. And the question is, okay, where is his simcha? So his simcha is in 2 places, all right? His simcha, number 1, is Nolam Haba, a lichtige Gan Eden, a shining, illuminated Gan Eden. But his Olam Hazeh, this worldly simcha shel mitzvah, this worldly reward, is students of his followers, people in this audience sitting here today who are inspired in some way by his contribution to this world. Whoever has lectures, whoever reads his books, whoever is following him in whatever sense they're following him, that's his reward in Olam Hazeh. Yehi Zichro Baruch. And obviously, if there are any questions, some of them are big, heavy ones, but we can try to answer a few before we call it a night.